For our text this morning, I'd like to go to Matthew chapter 16. And I'll be reading in a few moments verses 13 through 18. Matthew 16, verses 13 through 18. While you're turning there, let me say that we enjoyed our vacation last week, and yet we're glad to be back. Appreciate all of you that did things that I wouldn't be able to do not being here. But everyone takes care of things while I'm gone, and I know that, and I appreciate it. Of course, we will miss Eunice Cantrell, faithful, dear lady that's gone from our midst, and so faithful and part of our congregation. Matthew chapter 16, beginning with verse 13. When Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" So they said, "Well, some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered and said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus answered and said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it." This is a fascinating and critically important passage. Jesus now is at a crisis point in his earthly ministry. He has moved north out of the territory where he has been ministering. In fact, he goes farther north than at any other time in all of his life here. He travels, in fact, to what we might call a non-Jewish area. More Gentiles than Jews are in this area. In fact, is at the foot of Mount Hermon, which is one of the great, beautiful mountains even of this day. It's near the headwaters of the famous Jordan River. It was a beautiful, delightful place as far as the scenery, the view. It was honoring, of course, Caesar Tiberius of Rome, and also Philip, the governor of that particular area. And it was a popular area for pagan worship. In fact, the god Pan was worshipped there, and even there were things about the worship of Augustus Caesar in this area. So you would be surrounded by a lot of pagan idolatry in this area. But now the Lord has retreated, basically, to this area, and he needs to know some things. Some things need to be put to the disciples. And he has two questions. It's sort of exam time. It's test time. Two questions. In fact, I've called this lesson the greatest question ever asked. And by the way, it has spanned the centuries. And it's come down to us from that point to this morning in Lawton, Oklahoma. So let's talk about the supreme question or questions. The Lord asked two. By the way, I don't know exactly how to say this. It's rather risky for our preachers to ask people, "What do you think of me?" and "What do others think of me?" But not for this preacher, not for Jesus himself. My first question about those questions is this: why did he ask these questions? Well, first of all, he asked for himself. Now, of course, Jesus knows all men. John chapter 2 and verse 24 makes that point. But he needed to know the relationship. He needed to know exactly where he was in relationship to what they would know and understand and appreciate about him. So he did it for himself. Secondly, he did it for these specific disciples. They've been in close contact with the Lord, probably for about 2 years. They had been all around with him. They had heard and they had seen so very much. It was time now for them to express their convictions, their understandings. So it was good for them for these questions to come out. Thirdly, he needed to ask these questions for their contemporaries. Soon they would be proclaiming him and his message to all the people round about them. They would be, as the book of Acts talks about over and over again, his witnesses. They would be testifying and proclaiming lots of things about him. So the contemporaries, the people in their world at that time, needed to know what these questions would answer, or what the answers to them would be. And then fourthly, may I suggest, he did this questioning for us. We needed and we need to know what those that were so close to him knew and understood. What would they say after experiencing what they'd experienced? So it's for us, and that's why we can talk about it today and need to talk about these questions. My second question related to this is simply, what can we say about these questions, and especially the second one? Well, first of all, they were vitally important, especially the second one, as I said. Nothing else is as important more than this question that's asked here in the long ago. It is vital for us. Now, we'll talk about the importance of it in a few moments at my point or question number 4, but they're critically important. Number 2, they are to the individual, and especially am I thinking about that second question. Who do men say I am? The expression is plural there. Who would be plural, but the answer would be singular because it is individual, and Peter answers for the group, but he answers to a group of individuals. And that question, again, spans the centuries and comes down to us individually. I must answer this question, and you must too. What do you think about him? Who is he to you? Thirdly, it or they are insistent. And I mean by that, all mankind must answer these, and especially the second. We can't escape them. We can't dodge them or dismiss them. They demand an answer. You may be an unbeliever. You may be as far from the kingdom as you might imagine. But you need to answer, who is Jesus? Who is Jesus? And then fourthly, they were full of implications. If the answer is as Peter said, as we're going to talk about it in a moment, if the answer is as Peter expressed it, then there are a multitude of other matters that come in play, a multitude of issues that then we need to talk about, we need to answer, we need to relate to. It's only the essential one, and then others follow and demand answers. So no wonder the Lord spends time with the questions and answers. What were, thirdly, in my questioning, what were some of the answers given in the long ago and even today? Well, first of all, let's look at what was said by the disciples here. What did they affirm? And by the way, they mingled with the crowds. They understood what people were saying about Jesus. You know, as he was preaching and teaching, you know that those 12 would have moved among the people. They had overheard all kinds of statements about Jesus, responses to him, as people maybe would have whispered here and there and talked even boldly about this one and trying to figure out who exactly is this one that seems so unique. Well, they had the pulse of the people. And what were the people saying? Well, by the way, all that they say would be complimentary of Jesus. I mean, if you had only what they said in response to what do others think about me, they would be great, great compliments to the Lord. Both all, Matthew, Mark, and Luke give us an account of this. All of them speak of this particular passage. And they give these incidents, or these answers. First of all, there were those that would say it's John the Baptist. Jesus has been resurrected and he's come back. John the Baptist has returned. This is, for instance, reflected in Matthew chapter 14, verses 1 and 2. Herod thought that. You know, he had a guilty conscience about killing John the Baptist and beheading him. Well, he thought that John the Baptist had been resurrected. Secondly, there were those that said he is Elijah. In the spirit of Elijah, Jesus was there among them. In fact, you remember in the last book, in some of the last lines of the Old Testament, at Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, it says that that Elijah was coming and was to be a forerunner of the Messiah, of the coming one, the King. And so you can imagine they'd be thinking, well, here's the one that's coming for the big announcement. And then there were those that would say he was Jeremiah. We're not sure exactly why they would say that. Of course, Jeremiah was one of the great prophets of the Old Testament. Maybe it was because of the theme of judgment that was a part of Jeremiah's message. And then finally they said, one of the prophets. In other words, we recognize he's a special person and we may not be able to identify him with any of the great Old Testament prophets, but he's one of them. Well, that and that alone would have been, again, a high compliment of Jesus. But here are some other answers that were given during the Lord's ministry and even today. First of all, he was a carpenter. Mark chapter 6, verse 3. Now, there's nothing wrong in being a carpenter, and I don't mean that at all. But that's it. The people that were talking about him being a carpenter, that's all they would recognize him as being. And of course, the Lord was more than that. Secondly, there were those that, and even today, would think of the Lord as a great moral teacher, even a philosopher. Well, he was a great moral teacher, but again, there's way more about Jesus Christ than that. Thirdly, there were those in the first century and even today that would have answered he's a charlatan. In other words, a fake, a fraud, and what he did is just simply what you'd find some trickster or magician doing in our time. That's one answer. And then there were those that hated the Lord so viciously that would say he was in league with Beelzebub, which is another word for the devil. And this is found, for instance, in Luke chapter 11, verse 15. He's doing what he's doing because he's in league with the devil. And that was actually believed. There were those that would say he's a madman. John chapter 10, verse 20. We use the word crazy today. They would have said that of him. Madman. And then finally, and this is so common today among unbelievers, that he was some mythological character. And here's what they do, or how they do it. They say there was the Jesus of history. In other words, that human being that walked this earth, as they would say. But there's also the Christ of faith. And those two are totally different people. The historical person and that person of faith that the people came to believe in through the centuries. And so you can't tie them together. And what we as Christians today would believe, they would say, would be some mythological, fictional kind of character that's been invented and promoted through the centuries. Well, let me conclude by saying some of these are good. Some of these answers are bad. But none truly express the truth about Jesus. And so, Peter speaks. They've received the first question, who do men say that I am? And that's important. But now the second one, who do you say I am? And Peter now answers. And why do we say that this question and its answer is the supreme one of life? Well, first of all, because it is the foundation of the gospel, of the church, of salvation. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. If that simple yet profound statement is not true, my friends, we can turn out the lights this morning and go out in maybe the rain later and forget about this whole deal. It's worthless. It's meaningless. That statement is the heart of the gospel. Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God. It pulls together so much. In fact, in earlier parts of the Gospels, he is called the Son of God. That's not new. Nor is it new that he was called the Messiah or the Christ. But they're all now pulled together in this great confession of Peter. And it is the bedrock truth of the good news. But as you keep on reading down through the passage and the Lord begins to talk about the church, we realize that it's the foundation of the church. We work and worship together and serve the Lord in the church because that is the foundation. And if he's not the Christ, the Son of the living God, again, there's no reason for us to be here. And it's also the foundation of salvation. The right answer to this is absolutely fundamental to my salvation and yours. No possibility is left. And we are on our own if we cannot answer this as Peter did in the long ago. In fact, notice the Lord in verse 13 says, designates himself as the Son of Man, which is very interesting. Peter responds with, "You're the Son of God." What did he mean by the Son of Man? By the way, this is the title that the Lord gives himself over and over again, the Son of Man. In fact, he uses the expression, the Son of Man, meaning this is the unique individual to be known as the Son of Man. Well, what's the point of that? Well, I think one of the points would be the truth of what we call the incarnation. That's just a big word that means that Christ came in the flesh, that he really did partake of humanity. He wasn't some kind of ghost, some kind of appearance, but lacked the humanity that we share this morning. No, he was the Son of Man. But also that term is used, and by the way, if you don't have this in your notes, beside this passage, Daniel chapter 7, Old Testament prophecy, Daniel chapter 7 verses 13 and 14 talk about the Son of Man going back to the Lord and receiving a kingdom. And it's clearly talking about Jesus Christ, the supernatural one that is described as the Son of Man in that context. But back to this point about the incarnation, about God becoming flesh and dwelling among us, as John 1 says. Did you know that the first heresy in the church, the first false doctrine of those early days was not denying the deity or divinity of Christ, but rather his humanity. There were people that just couldn't believe that God, the God of the universe, could come to this earth and dwell among men and be God as well as a human being. That was heresy. In fact, there were doctrines that would be described as appearing. He looked like a human being, but he really wasn't truly a human being. Now notice Peter's answer. It is combining Messiah or Christ or the Anointed One. All of those are referring to the same thing. The Christ, the Messiah. And the Lord is taking hold of that and possessing that term as Peter delivers it. There are 4 these, by the way, in this confession. The Son of Man, and then thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. All of those emphatic and pointed, this is truly the one. And then the Son of God is talking about his deity. You know, I share the humanity of my Father. I'm his son. We share basic characteristics of nature. And that's what he's talking about here, the Son of God. And notice the expression Son of Man and Son of God both used here with Jesus. In Luke chapter 22, verses 69 and 70, you find the combination of those two. He's called the Son of Man, and then he's called the Son of God. They're referring to the same person and making it very, very unique. Notice also he's called the Son of the living God. I mentioned a moment ago as we began the lesson that this area of Caesarea Philippi, down around where they're sitting and where they're working and they're talking about these matters and the questions are answered, was an area filled with paganism, dead, lifeless idolatry, and all of that superstition, lifeless things. And here Peter says, you are the Son of the living God, the God that lived then, has lived for all eternity, and lives today. That's the confession of faith. Now then notice verse 17, if you will, there in Matthew 16. The Lord says, you didn't receive this that you've just said from men. You didn't figure this out because a bunch of fellow human beings told you. He said, this is not from flesh and blood. And by the way, Galatians chapter 1 and verse 16 has that term used of humanity, just human beings. You didn't get this from humanity, but it was truth revealed by God himself, not speculation, not guessing or supposing, but God revealed this truth to Peter and those that were with him that day. Now, there was 3 steps, you might say, in what happened. First of all, you have with Peter and the apostles, the rest of the apostles, conviction. I mean, they really believe this, and they'll die for this conviction. I mean, they are convicted in their knowledge and understanding. This is truth to them. Secondly, there is the confession. When you have a real conviction, you want to confess it. You want to tell the world. Jesus wanted to know. And here they tell him, through Peter, exactly what they believe about him. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. No greater confession could be made than that. And then finally, commitment. I mean, you don't just voice something and that's it. No, this is the 3rd step. The commitment of a life. A commitment and dedication to the one that is indeed the Christ, the Son of the living God. Let me ask you, what's your answer this morning? What's your answer? Who is Christ? Now, if he is the Son of the living God, then again, as we said earlier, there are all kinds of implications with that. The Son of God demands our lives, our obedience, our acceptance of his will, of going in his direction, not our direction, but for us to ask, Lord, what is your will, and we will do it. As he said to the Father, not my will, but yours be done. And so your answer to that question is really a call for obedience, a call to confess that faith this morning and be baptized for the remission of your sins. It's to accept him in your life with all the spiritual blessings like forgiveness of sins that comes through him, to become a part of the kingdom of the church and enjoy the blessings of being a part of the family of God. So do you believe in him? Are you willing to make that confession that you have in this very passage? Are you willing to turn your life around with that confession in mind, saying, Lord, you guide me, you lead me? And then that master, that Lord, that Christ, the Son of the living God, demands that we be baptized in his name, that very name we're talking about this morning, immersed in water for the remission of our sins. If you need to respond to the invitation of Christ this morning, won't you come now? Well, together we stand and sing.